Okay, welcome to Mediation Works. I'm Sharon Sutherland, and beside me on the screen is Wendy Lakusta. We are here to talk a little bit about tips for co-mediation. We're creating this video primarily to support the mediators who are part of Mediate BC's new quarantine conflict resolution service, where roster mediators are going to be co-mediating with associate mediators. But I want to emphasize that we're not focusing on anything that looks like a mentoring relationship as we talk through our tips. We're talking about mediators who are bringing different skill sets, but everybody's bringing skills. And they're trying to find ways to work together as effectively as possible in what may be a new environment for many of them, as most of these mediations will have to take place online. Wendy, do you want to start off with some tips?
Sure. Yeah. The first tip that we want to talk about is sharing expectations. And this is pretty important for the roster mediator and the associate mediator who are co-mediating to share their expectations with each other. I found in the past doing co-mediations and so on, it's, as I said, it's critical because there's so many different styles out there and there's so many different expectations in terms of how much, of the mediation people want to lead, which areas they feel most competent in. People come in with a lot of variety in terms of experience mediating. For instance, it's very different if you're working with somebody who maybe has a law background as opposed to somebody who maybe has a business background. The law background, they may want to be involved in writing the agreement or a settlement or a memo of understanding, something like that. Whereas somebody else might be a little bit nervous about that piece of it. So at the very least, what we do is we have a discussion and we talk about maybe sharing particular parts, like when somebody's first starting off and say number 1 out of 10 mediations, they might at the very least be involved in the introductions, go over the agreement to mediate that covers confidentiality, that type of thing. And so, you have the discussion around that and see how much. Personally, in my mentoring and in my co-mediation background, I like to do right from number 1 to number 10, like a co-mediation, so that it's a bit more organic. People can step in and step out. That's my style. But other people want more of a practical game plan, like, I'm going to do the agreement to mediate to start, and I'm going to observe most of number 1 and then get more involved in number 2, that type of thing. So there's different ways to do it, and the co-mediators can figure out what works best for them. The other thing that I just want to touch on with this tip is sharing expectations is managing the online meeting space. This is all kind of new for me, so it's something that I'm going to grapple with, that's for sure. I kind of would like to work with somebody who's a bit more techie than I am, and so that they can sort of oversee that part of it. You might get 2 people though that are not too techie, so you're going to want to have a good discussion about who's managing that space, because it can get a little awkward. It's not like being in person. And then who's going to lead identified segments, that type of thing. So that's basically what we talk about when we talk about sharing expectations. Is there anything you want to add?
I would just, I would throw in, just for the sake of the people who are on the quarantine conflict resolution service, that one thing that might be a useful thing to talk about is, what does it mean to be actively participating? Because for the people who are on the associate roster, if their plan is to get on one of the Mediate BC rosters, then the actual measure for that is active participation in 10 mediations. So maybe just being really clear about all of the things you've talked about, Wendy, but around what does it look like to be actively participating?
Exactly, because that could look different to 2 different people,
Yeah. Could easily have a very different understanding of what that means.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow up with our second tip, which definitely follows on what you've already been talking about, which is about clarifying style. You mentioned your own style. I think it's really important that we talk really clearly about what our styles are. Both mediators need to talk about their styles. And when I'm talking about styles in this sense, I'm talking about, like, do you have a real process that you've learned and you stick with and you really follow through. You're flexible around what parties are saying, but you really do want to see the process running through a very specific kind of model. A lot of people learn step models. A lot of people have very focused ways in which they carry on conversations and say, we're going to go through the agenda this way. Other people are way more responsive in the moment and think of mediation much more, I don't know, cyclically or organically, but have a really different sense of how they're going to engage in the dynamics that are happening in the room. There's no reason that mediators who come from different kinds of styles can't work incredibly effectively together. And in fact, they can really enhance each other's style. The participants are likely to come from different styles too. They may not like somebody who's ranging widely around different topics and switching back and forth. They may actually want to say, no, let's stick to an agenda. Let's go through this. So either way can work. What matters is conversation about what direction as a co-mediation team you're going to take and how you're going to respond to changes or differences in what's happening. You can't assume that the other person just learned the same way you did, does the same thing you do, and is going to go through the process in the same way. So really dig down into what is your style, what is your process, how do you anticipate responding, and come up with a plan to communicate about things that do not flow exactly the way you've talked about it. Yeah. And Wendy, you also talked about division of tasks. I'm going to just go a little bit more as for our number 3 into division of tasks, specifically for online mediation, if you like. Because the online mediation, as you kind of pointed out, it offers some really nice benefits in that there are some clear ways to divide up roles if you're online. It can be a great way to learn to co-mediate simply by having one person take specific charge of the tech. You might, as a newer mediator, you might have fantastic skills with the technology. So you might actually walk everybody through how to use the tool. If you're on Zoom, even if you're on telephones, there might be ways that you talk through, this is how we're going to interact on this. You might manage chat boxes that are happening if they're on the side. You might invite tech questions to you through the chat box. You might walk through everything that's happening in breakout rooms. So you might have a very, very active role that is specifically engaged around facilitating the process online. Wendy and I are both pretty experienced at mediation, but I know we had a bit of a conversation preparing for this about the fact that really both of us would kind of like a co-mediator in this particular environment, because it's really, really different. Part of it is the tech itself. Part of it is just managing, how do you watch people? How do you manage the different environment and the responses that people are giving? How do you track that? So I think it would be fantastic to have a co-mediator anytime I had more than a couple people in gallery view and I'm trying to manage that, just to have somebody else monitoring at the same time. Wendy, anything you wanted to add to either of those?
No, I totally agree with you. I look forward to a co-mediator that has some tech skills. Right. So moving on, after the co-mediators have talked about division of tasks, and after they've talked about their styles and expectations and how they're going to share the working time together, the next tip is getting a game plan for the pre-mediation meetings. Now we're going to assume that it's best practice that you have pre-mediation meetings, in other words, meeting individually with the participants prior to coming together for the actual mediation. That is a model that is generally used and in my mind is very effective. And I believe that most of these online ones, that's going to be the model. That's correct, right, Sharon?
Certainly we're encouraging everybody to do it that way.
Right. Okay. And so there's different approaches that you can do, but the co-mediators would have a talk and, like I said, get a game plan together before meeting with the participants individually. One approach that's pretty common is that perhaps the roster mediator would take a lead on the first meeting, the first person, so that the associate mediator can observe and get a feel for how the meeting goes. And then they would take a lead on the second assuming that there's two participants, there might be more than two. In a lot of disputes, there's more than two. So you could figure out how you're going to, who would take a lead and how you would manage subsequent individual meetings. So that's a common approach, but you may be working with an associate mediator who's got a lot of experience and is very confident and wants to do each separate meeting as a co-mediation or co-facilitation. That's fine too. Whatever works for folks. And in this conversation that you have about the pre-mediation meetings, you're going to talk about what kinds of things need to be covered. You're getting to know the participants, you're getting to know what the dispute's about, you're getting to know what kind of agenda they want. You'll get a pretty good idea of how the discussion's going to flow. And you also might want to talk about how you're going to follow up with each other during the sessions. For instance, if you're meeting with one of the participants and they're highly escalated, and you're sort of finding an example like that. From my experiences, the more experienced mediator, maybe the roster mediator, would sort of take charge of that, take more of a lead if people are highly escalated. Then how do you give it back? So you'll have a discussion about that, how you can give it back to the other mediator so that they can step forward and sort of not be left on the back burner, right? So you have all those kinds of discussions going in. And then, I mean, it's really going to depend on how it goes. There's a lot of, strategizing that's going to happen in the moment, but those are the kind of discussions you're going to have before going into the separate meetings.
Great.
Yeah. So should I move on to our next tip, which is strategizing for the joint session?
Sure. I think that flows really nicely.
Yeah. And I talked a little bit about strategizing for the separate meetings. Well, for the joint session, you want to try to find a balance for strategizing more about how the process is going to flow, not necessarily how you're going to manage the content or that type of thing. But you've already had the separate meetings, so you've gotten to know a little bit about the dispute, about the content, about the personalities and the how people handle themselves, the dynamics of the participants. So you can strategize a little bit around that. Somebody might need a little bit more managing, and so you'll talk to your co-mediator about who's going to do what and how you can best manage people, how you can manage some of the content, that build an agenda, that type of thing. And you might have some background information. The dispute may have disclosed some information that you think you need to disclose, put all your cards on the table so that people aren't, hiding things from each other. So you want to talk about all of that with your co-mediator. And also you want to revisit the discussion about your different styles. Now that you know more about what's going to be happening in the joint session, how are our styles going to work back and forth, that type of thing. Anything you want to add?
Well, just on that note, Wendy, when you were talking a little bit about just the need to be able to hand things back off, if somebody takes charge because there's something maybe escalated, maybe a difficult topic, you'd have a bit of a plan going into the private meetings around how do you do that. And I think that might be worth explicitly saying that's part of the thing you can revisit as well, because it may not have worked as well as you wanted it to in that session. And often that's a question of asking, like, were you comfortable when I handed that back to you, really transparently, and said, hey, are you ready to go? Just take that over, or whatever approach it was that you used, and just figure out, does that work, and how are you going to continue with it in the joint session?
Right, because you may have to modify how you're working together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good chance to just check in and see what worked, what didn't work, how do we fix it?
Right.
Yeah. If you're good, I'll go on to backchannels, because that was kind of an interesting topic when we were chatting yesterday. Just the notion of backchannels and co-mediation is something that doesn't come up, at least not in that way, in most in-person co-mediations.
Mhm.
You just assume that you might have private meetings, you might step out of the room, you might have conversations with your co-mediator, maybe you'll signal each other, maybe you'll slide notes. There's lots of ways in which people talk about it, but they don't usually think about it as this back channel, which is something that definitely comes up when you're using a platform like Zoom, for instance, where we could send private chat messages to each other throughout the discussion. And I think we need to just talk about what works for each person, and that's a discussion that you should be having. If I send Wendy a private chat note right now, it might be really helpful if we already have a plan that, hey, I'm going to send a note when I'm thinking it's a good time to go into a private meeting. And it just says, caucus, question mark. I could do that pretty quickly. Wendy can kind of nod, think about it. It isn't a particularly disruptive thing, but we're probably all in gallery view. We've probably got everybody able to see each other. You can see that I'm keyboarding. If I'm doing it for a long time, it's both distracting and it may look like I'm not paying any attention to what's going on. And I might just throw Wendy completely off if I start sending her these long notes that she's trying to read while she's still trying to manage what else is going on. So you really do need to have a quick chat. Are there things you might want to send? Are there things you wouldn't? I would suggest that you also need to be quite transparent about the fact that you might send notes to each other, but what kind of notes they'd be, because I would suggest that for most of us, we're not encouraging private messages back and forth between the parties. We're not going to, in fact, leave that as an option. They won't be able to send private chat. So let's be really, really transparent about what it is that you're doing with your co-mediator and how you might do that and what you're comfortable with. Just remember, just as there are with any other separate meeting, there are lots of other ways that we can talk to our co-mediator and get on the same page. So just, I'd say be conscious, think it through, do what's going to work for you, and just be aware that you've had the conversation and know what works for each of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I would be thrown off if somebody sent me a long message. But we do that in person sometimes too. You know, I'll just say separate meetings and slide it over. You know, it's time. But with these back channels, we could just put a hand up.
Yeah, it's true. Lots of signaling is good.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll move on to talk a little bit about our seventh tip, which is separate meetings. Basically, with separate meetings, the first thing that the first tip that I think is really critical is don't have separate meetings apart. The two mediators, the co-mediators. I find this all the time when somebody is first starting out. They think that makes total sense. You know, you go with this group and I'll go with this group. I would say don't do that, because there's a multitude of reasons actually not to do that. It breaks down neutrality. People start thinking this is my mediator and this is my mediator. You're not hearing all the same information together, which is really important to hear the same information together. So don't divide the co-mediators. That's my first tip. The other thing about separate meetings is timing is really critical. And again, that little back channel, I find that when people are starting out, they sometimes want to go to separate meetings or caucusing really quick. You know, they feel like things have reached an impasse and it's like, boom, let's go to caucus. And so very often when I'm working with a co-mediator that's just fairly new, I will try to delay that, you know, keep them at the table talking to folks, trying to work through things. There's usually you can get a lot more information before going into separate meetings. So timing's important. The other thing about separate meetings is between the co-mediators themselves, is really important for strategizing in real time. Where are we going to go next? You know, what this is where we are. Where are you going to go next? And I always like to ask my co-mediator, you know, what are your thoughts? Where do you think we should go next? And get their take on it, because I probably have something on my mind, but it can be really refreshing to hear where somebody else might go. Like, who are we going to talk to next? How are we going to manage this? That type of thing. And the other thing about separate meetings is I like to use a lot, and you alluded to this or said this actually, Sharon, is to use a lot of transparency. Tell people what we're doing, and then normalize the heck out of it. Say it's really normal that the mediators will take a minute to talk. Just basically to decide where we're going to go next, how it's going to be most helpful for everyone, that type of thing. And so you just tell them what you're doing, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit yesterday just about what it looks like with meetings of co-mediators online. So that's number 8 on our list is meetings with co-mediators online. Because it's different. You're not stepping out of a room together. You're not going to be physically in the same space as your co-mediator either. So what kind of differences are there? And one thing I just wanted to really emphasize, because I think a lot of people don't spend enough time online, or at least haven't in the past, to realize just how much extra energy it takes to be engaged in conversations online. It's a different your brain is going through a really different processing when you are looking at people and trying to pull together the images in a gallery view of a bunch of people. It's not the same. You're not using peripheral vision. You're not getting the same clues from different kinds of more of the body and leaning. Everything is different, and your brain can get exhausted. And it's really it is something that we just need to be conscious of, that it's not something we do all the time. It takes a different kind of energy. Everybody gets tired quicker. And that's a good reason to just normalize, we're going to take breaks every 45 minutes. Everybody is. We're going to find a good time around 45 minutes to do it. And that's a good chance for you to talk to your co-mediator. But a couple of just hints around that. You may still want the brain rest that everybody else is getting by getting off the screen at that time. So maybe have a plan to pick up a phone and have a conversation. Maybe have a plan to just switch gears yourself so you are still getting the break too and having a different kind of communication. You might switch to chat and send some private chat messages if that works for you. The one thing to really be conscious of is if you're co-mediating on Zoom, what you don't want to do is let everybody else sign out of the main room and you and your co-mediator stay in and start having conversations in there, because you want the parties to be able to sign back in. Even though you will be able to admit them, you will be able to monitor, you might just forget. There are lots of ways in which you might actually just be inviting people back into the same thing. Go to a breakout if you've decided you need to do it online. Go put yourselves in a breakout room and have that conversation so that others aren't coming in and you have an opportunity. And as Wendy was saying, just be really transparent about what you're doing, that you're going to take a few minutes and you'll rejoin. No problem with that, but do figure out ways to do it. Anything you wanted to add to that one, Wendy?
No, that's, I totally agree with that. I apologize. I'm getting texts in the background. We have no animals today, but we do have our phones in the background.
Oh, there's always something.
The beauty of this online Zoom stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's the thing. Normalize all of that too, because something will happen. The texts are one thing. I mean, I have the door closed, which is why I don't have dogs in here right now, but they're there all the time.
Yeah. And do you want to talk a little bit about the next tip of capturing the resolution?
Yeah, sure. We were going to talk just a little bit about the fact that, I mean, whoever you are in this process, you'll be making different decisions around whether you're going to be writing up an agreement, whether you're going to be doing a memorandum of understanding, sharing mediator notes or something like that to support the parties putting something together. All kinds of reasons why you might document things in different kinds of ways. But we're going to just assume that for whatever reason, that the co-mediators have decided that they're going to draft something. They're in some way going to memorialize a resolution. And I just wanted to highlight that this is a great place. Wendy kind of alluded to this at the beginning, that this is one of those things where maybe somebody has particular strengths in agreement writing. And this is a great place to divvy up the task again and share. But that person might be somebody who has not taken the lead on other parts of the mediation. And that's a really good opportunity to change things up. I want to encourage you, if you're using online platforms, to think about the ways that you can benefit from having a co-mediator in doing the drafting together as much as possible. Can definitely use a whiteboard with many of these different processes. Zoom has a whiteboard function. Personally, I prefer to share a plain Word doc. And so I'll share it from my computer and I will type in, while Wendy, for instance, as a co-mediator, might lead everybody through the process, might ask questions about the kinds of things I'm putting in, because Wendy would be able to watch everybody's face. And yes, you can set it so you're seeing faces as well as seeing the shared document. Make sure you've done that so you are looking at the faces. But checking, and because she can be watching to see how people react while I'm looking down to keyboard or looking at my document to make sure that I'm following what's going on. It's a chance to normalize around the language that I might put in. It really can work incredibly well to have the two mediators. And we do this in the room a lot, Wendy. I know you and I have both done this a lot, but it really works nicely in this particular thing. And just, if you're not feeling confident enough, you can also draft offline. You don't have to do it there. It's a benefit, I think, to have the parties contributing to the wording as you go, but you can draft offline together and come back. And you might as well spend some time doing that on a shared document too, so that you can both be talking it through. It's really a nice tool. I don't know, Wendy, did you want to say more about that?
No, I think you've captured it. I think it goes back to when you're talking at the beginning about sharing tasks and style, talking about styles and that type of thing. You will have talked about this, and you will also have talked about how you're going to track the agreement terms during the mediation. Maybe one of the mediators is tracking the terms while the other one's facilitating. Maybe they're both tracking terms, and then compare the terms when they're drafting whatever kind of agreement document that you decide upon. So there's all of that is hopefully been decided ahead of time, and but then you have to be flexible as well when you're actually drafting it in real time. There may be reasons that you may have to modify your approach, right?
Always are, but but no, that's actually a really good reminder. Yeah. You could easily normalize. I mentioned not sitting there typing away on the screen, and yet it's entirely possible that you have told the parties that, in fact, one of us is going to be just trying to track any points of agreement. So you might see Sharon with her head down keyboarding for a little bit. Yeah. But that's what she's doing. She's not doing something weird and offline and ignoring you.
Yeah, exactly. And it really depends on the dynamics in the room. Sometimes you don't want to draft in front of the parties, because if it's highly contentious, things can implode. And so you want to, keep people calm and separated. It's case by case.
Yeah. Well, did you want to talk about debriefing? I think we're kind of at the end of what we're talking about.
Right. Okay. Well, debriefing between the co-mediators, as you said at the beginning, this is not this project for the excuse me it involves experienced mediators. So it's not like a mentorship. It's not, you're not necessarily handling the debriefing the same way as you would if you were mentoring somebody in a formal practicum, for instance. So first thing that you probably want to do is think about the timing. Is it really appropriate and effective to do some kind of debriefing immediately following the mediation? Or do you want to allow people some time to digest and process what's happened, and set a time to meet later? That's not uncommon, especially, it really depends. If you spend a lot of time together, you probably do need some time to process. I think probably some combination of maybe a very brief debrief, and then set a time to go in more detail and have people, their questions will come up as they think about what happened. And I think a really good approach is for maybe the roster mediator to ask their co-mediator, what do you want to talk about? Like how do you want this debrief to go? What do you want to get out of it? And some people might say that they want a bit of a critique, or they want feedback, constructive feedback, or they might want, I can almost guarantee they want to talk about the parties. They're going to want to analyze what happened and who said what, and all about they want to dissect the dispute. That's natural. We all do that. So that's certainly going to happen. But I would ask them, how do you want this to go? What's going to be the most helpful for you? What do you want to get out of it? And also recognizing that the tech part of this is, I can see that it's going to get scapegoated a lot. If things, got awkward at certain points or kind of went a little bit sideways and so on, it's going to be pretty easy to blame the technology and the fact that you're not there in person. And in fact, that may be the case. I mean, those kinds of things are going to happen. But you want to make sure that you don't focus entirely on what would have worked better if it hadn't been, online. It's just a given that this is how we're having to do our work these days, right? Mm-hmm. Anything you want to add to that, Sharon?
I think that's right. It'll be interesting to have the opportunity to kind of talk about new experiences, because it'll be a new experience for everybody to be co-mediating and co-mediating online, or for virtually everybody. Some of us have online experience, some of us have co-mediation experience. Few of us are going to have had the experience of this kind of process where everybody's separate, and it'll be fascinating. We can all learn a lot from it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's our 10 tips. And I'd just like to kind of wrap it up by saying that Sharon and I both really enjoy co-mediating, and we're looking forward to doing it in this online environment. And we hope to hear what kind of skills are developing through this program. And it's a mouthful to say the Quarantine Conflict Resolution Service, but that's what this program's all about. And we hope that that some of these co-mediation tips can be carried forward into non-quarantine time following. And the last thing I want to point out is that you also might want to access some other Mediation Works videos that Sharon and I have done together. In 2017, we did a series on mentoring, and these are available on the CORE website. And the one that I'm thinking of was a series on mentoring, and it featured really experienced mediators and mentors, Julie Dahm, Richard Singer, Gordon White, and Sharon and myself. And also in 2018, the CORE Speaker Series featured a really interesting video. I enjoyed doing it on mentoring effectively. And that featured one of my favorite all-time mediators, Joyce Bradley, and also very experienced mediator, Ashley Sire. So I think we're going to attach the links if anybody's interested in following up and maybe getting some more tips. I hope you enjoy that.
Yeah, we'll put the links in the description below, so people should be able to find them there, Wendy.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, everybody.
And thank you, Wendy. Bye-bye.
Bye.